Hello, I'm Teacher Jess, and welcome back to Jira Cafe. I know it's been a while, but I hope you guys are all doing well. I know there are many matrics or grade 12s out there that are very anxious about the upcoming exams. Best of luck. I'm thinking about you guys, and I hope that I can somehow help in some or other way. You're always welcome to ask questions, mention any topics, anything in particular that you might need help revising on. Yeah. Got your coffee ready? Yes. So the topic that I was thinking about doing today is a topic that is covered by two of my different grades. The one is the grade 9s and the other is the grade 11s, but it's basically looking at soil erosion. And the reason why the topic about soil erosion is so important is because soil is probably one of our most important resources, but we tend to overlook it. We don't really realize how valuable soil actually is, even in our everyday lives. So let me get the screen up. There we go. Perfect. Okay, soil erosion and conservation. So, like I said, soil is a resource and it's considered a non-renewable resource. So, before we can look at why soil is really important and why we need to conserve it, we first need to understand how it's formed. And that also speaks to how soil is seen as non-renewable. So, if you remember your basics about renewable and non-renewable resources, renewable are resources that would replenish themselves. So we like to use the example of trees. Trees can grow back if you cut them down, but we still need to manage them wisely. You can't cut down 10 and grow back one. Then eventually we're going to run out of trees. Okay, it's like maths 101. Um, the same concept applies to soil. Even though soil is formed, it is formed very, very slowly. And the way we use it, we can deplete the soil faster than it regenerates because of how slowly it is formed. Okay, so soil erosion by itself is actually a fairly natural process. We've just been accelerating it a bit in some of the ways that we use soil. And the reason why it's such a valuable resource is because it takes so long to form. So in this reference, I found that takes about 10,000 years for soil to form. In another one, it said about 20,000 years. It completely depends on the environment that the soil is forming in. So it depends on the humidity and the organic material, the types of things that live there, and we're going to unpack all of that still. So I want us to look at how soil is formed, the different things that contribute to soil formation, the reason why we should worry or should care about soil erosion and conservation, and the types of things that can be done to conserve soil. And don't even be surprised if at this point you happen to go outside, take a drive somewhere, and look around you and notice one or two little things that seem familiar over here. Like that kind of looks like what we spoke about in Jira Cafe. Like that looks a little familiar. So the more you learn about it, the more aware you become of it. And the more you see people are actually doing stuff to conserve this resource. Okay. Okay, so the this was just to we're not actually going to go into the whole structure of the soil and the different layers. There are so many different types of soil, completely dependent on where it's formed, and it has different mineral properties and different like organic matter properties and all of that stuff. For now, we just kind of need to know that soil has different layers, and it is the top layer that is the most valuable. That is where you can see all of the grass and the plants is growing in. All right, expect. Okay, soil formation. So, like I said, I've gained different information from different sources. Some sources said 20,000 years, others 10,000 years to get some nice, healthy, lush soil. Over here you can see it takes about 100 to 400 years for 1 centimeter of soil to form. So I think it's just safe to say it takes a very long time. We don't have to put an exact number on it. It just takes too long. Okay, and it's a combination of different ingredients. So we have the sand, we have different organic matter, so that can be decaying plants, and we've got different organisms that can be the bacteria or the little critters that live in it. It needs, for soil to be healthy, it needs a good supply of oxygen and air and water. So it needs to have a good balance for nice lush, fertile soil. Okay, so these are the different topics that we're going to look at as things that affect soil formation. Now, I put human activity in right in the beginning. Human activity impacts the other factors. So it's not like we are making soil or anything like that. It's more that we have an impact on the other factors. So this was a nice diagram that I found that just kind of shows how humans impact the climate. We impact microclimate, like with the heat island effect, or climate change, or droughts. Humans impact topography, so we impact the shape of the landscape. That can be with mining areas, it might flatten out land, or developing in other areas, it would actually completely overturn the soil formation process. And the time, I'm not saying that we can somehow change time, but we can interrupt a process or we can restart a process. Maybe soil was on its way forming at this step and this step, and along we come and start building a parking lot there. Now that whole formation has been interrupted. Okay, so we impact the other factors. So probably one of the first most important ones is the parent material. The parent material is the starting rock. It is the rock or whatever material starts to break down to form the soil. And whatever the parent material is will influence the type of soil that you have at the end. Different types of minerals, different types of elements in that parent material and in the whole process of breaking down and formation will influence the type of soil that you end up with and the type of plants that that soil can support very well. If anyone knows anything about gardening, you'll be able to tell me all about how this type of plant maybe needs a clay-rich soil and this type of plant needs a well-drained sandy soil or something like that. So you will know there are so many different types of soils that support different types of plant life and ecosystems with that. And all of that starts from the different type of parent rocks. So this is just some important terminology that my kids need to know. They need to know what minerals are. So those are your basically chemicals inside of rocks. Although it sounds like such a bad term, as chemicals. No, it's just inorganic material. Soil texture, you can kind of think about how fine or coarse the soil is. And then soil structure is basically how mixed it is and the combination of lots of fine or lots of coarse. Okay, sorry, is all of this making sense so far? Are we happy? Hmm. What I like about this is it kind of shows the steps of the soil formation. So how it starts with the parent rock just starting to weather away and break down from the different physical or environmental factors, and how you have the other ingredients like the organic matter and just time starting to break it down. You can see it starts to erode and weather from the surface. And that's how you end up with these layers. And the further down you go, the more you get of the original parent rock and the bedrock, and it changes, obviously with time, with the exposure to the process, and you get these different layers. Climate. Now, climate also has a big impact on soil formation. Where you have a warmer climate, you tend to have soil forming a bit faster. Um, Humidity is also necessary for good soil formation, but funnily enough, not too much rainfall. So a lot of rainfall can actually result in what we call leaching, and that is where the soil loses some of its minerals and the good chemicals that you want in the soil. So essentially, what happens is that the water comes along, it dissolves these minerals and these good chemicals, and then it washes it away. And if you get this constant pouring of the water, it will keep washing away these minerals. And then you're left behind with this very leached soil that doesn't have the same positive characteristics as it used to before. It doesn't have the same value as it used to. Okay, so warm climate is good. Humid climate, yes. Not too much rainfall though. Okay, and then our little creepy crawlies that live in the soil. So the organisms are any type of living things inside the soil. They live in it, they dig, they make their little homes, they eat the decaying matter, and all of that contributes to the soil and its I want to say its value, but its positive properties. So your larger animals that actually dig and burrow through the soil, it helps get oxygen and air into it. You've got positive bacteria and fungi and those types of things that help break down decaying material. It can prevent some of the plants from getting any kind of like a rot or diseases. Um, the whole process takes a very long time. I think we've mentioned that a few times though. Yeah, am I missing anything? Oh, and then you get, in some cases, you get some bacteria that also helps reintroduce minerals into the soil. So I was recently reading about, I think it's called nitrogen fixing plants, but basically there's certain bacteria that lives around those plants that helps introduce nitrogen back into the soil. We're talking about, okay, so a bit of context. I'm teacher Jess. I'm a geography teacher, and I'm trying to do a revision lesson on soil erosion and soil conservation. So I teach high school, and my grade 9s and grade 11s are going to be learning about this section this term. So I wanted to create this material for them for anyone else who wants to have a refresher on soil erosion. But thank you for joining, and welcome to GeoCafe. I like this diagram just because I think it's cute and gross at the same time. And the more you look at it, the more icky it becomes. But it's all the different types of organisms that live in the soil and help keep the soil healthy. So we've got, no, come back. We've got the earthworm chowing the rat. We've got, I'm assuming this is like a fungus busy breaking down the corn. We have, I don't know what these are, ants or mites or what, chowing the apple. And all of this just contributes to the teeming life force of the soil. And they're also critical in keeping the soil balanced and healthy. Okay, topography. So topography, if you're not familiar, is the basically the shape of the landscape, how steep or gentle or how mountainous or hilly or flat an area is. So a steep slope tends to have thinner soil, and very flat, gentle slopes or the bottom of valleys tend to have a thicker layer of soil. Basically, the reason for that is that where you have the steep soil, um, the steep slope, the the soil would just kind of roll down, especially if you have rain or wind or anything like that. It will just roll down and it won't really build up on the slopes. And then towards the bottom where it's flatter, it slowly builds up and you have these thick layers of nice fertile soil. Okay, and then finally, our last ingredient is time. All of this needs time to form. So you can't just start with a parent rock and hope that eventually soil comes from it. You need a combination of all different processes. You need weathering, you need the breakdown, you need the organisms, you need the right climate, and you need all of this to have enough time to form a balanced, healthy soil composition. Okay, once again, I just really like this diagram. It shows you how important time is to this whole process. We have the bedrock or the parent material over here. We can see it starting to break down, forming different types of material. We've got the addition of organic matter. We've got the plants, the grass, and the small shrubberies starting to grow into it. And then finally, we've got the organisms starting to tear it apart. And of course, you need the right climate to support all of these processes. And in the end, you will have some type of layered soil. Typical profile is something like this. When you know a bit more about soil, you'll be able to tell me that it doesn't all look like this. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you. But the point is that this is just an example of the profile of soil. This tiny little section at the top, the O and A, that is where most of your plants grow. So that's where your root structures are. And that is what is so incredibly valuable. And this is what gets washed away when we look at soil erosion. Gotta have some coffee. Wonderful. It's not Geo Cafe without coffee. Okay, now that we have an understanding about why soil is so important, let's take a look at how soil gets eroded. Now, I did say that soil erosion is a natural process, but we do accelerate it with some of human activities. So let's unpack that. Okay, human causes of soil erosion. Industrialization, so this is just the development of anything, the building and growing of human activities. Of course, that will lead to soil erosion. As soon as you need to clear away and make space in the land, you are disrupting any types of processes there. Yay! Thank you so much for joining. Okay, then overgrazing. So I'm still going to explain what overgrazing is. But that's basically where you have livestock being supported on a patch of land, and they basically eat too much. So the soil doesn't have a chance, or the plants and the vegetation doesn't have a chance to regrow as quickly as the livestock is eating it. Overexploitation, that is the complete overuse of soil. So farming from soil without really thinking about long-term sustainability or how to keep the soil healthy. And then deforestation. Deforestation seems to just be the villain in every story, but basically when you chop down the trees and you chop down, well, any type of vegetation in that area, you're leaving the soil very exposed and very vulnerable, and then it can get eroded. The main processes of soil erosion is by water or wind. Uh, South Africa is fairly dry. For context, I'm from South Africa. That's why we look at South Africa. South Africa is fairly dry as a whole, as a country, but a lot of it is still due to water erosion, and that's very often because of irrigation or poor management or something like that. And then wind erosion is another big one, like I said, because we are so dry. So where it's dry and you don't have a lot of vegetation to cover the ground, the water can just, sorry, the wind would just blow the soil and the sediment away. Okay, let's take a look at what actually contributes to soil erosion. So agriculture is one of the biggest culprits, and it's not agriculture in general, it's just some not ideal practices of agriculture. So when we are using the soil for agriculture, we really breaking it down. We are using it to the best of its abilities. We're exploiting as much as we can from it, but we still need to manage it and make sure that that use is sustainable. Okay. So these are some of the practices that aren't so favorable in terms of soil protection and conservation. So the one is monoculture. Monoculture is the idea of only using one type of crop, so only growing one type of crop. And the reason why this isn't so good is because every type of crop has certain needs for a soil, and it will extract those minerals and those chemicals that it needs for its growth. And it leaves the soil with an imbalance. And it doesn't become as useful as it once was before. Then marginal land, so plowing marginal land, that is area that isn't really ideal to be farmed on, but it's using it anyway. Hello, welcome to Geo Cafe. I see it's your first time here. So just to catch you up, we're learning about soil erosion. Thank you. So marginal land that's not ideal for farming, and that's why it's kind of discouraged to be used because it can't really support long-term or sustainable farming. Then lack of crop rotation. So I mentioned with monoculture, that is farming the same type of crop over and over again. And crop rotation basically means changing up the crop the whole time. So using crop rotation will help keep the soil healthy and balanced. Okay, and then planting crops down contour lines. Soil erosion happens with a medium, and that medium is usually water. So water will come, it will wash over the landscape, and it will carry that soil away. And if you are planting with rows down a hill, you're kind of channeling that soil down the hill. So you're encouraging that erosion to happen. And that's why you don't want to plant down the hill. You want to kind of plant horizontally, that it almost acts like a little dam down the hill, like steps. And then we get to the animals. If you have too many animals trying to survive off of a patch of land, it will exploit the soil. Um, like I was saying, if the livestock is trying to survive off of the plants that's growing there, the grass that is growing there, and they're eating it faster than that grass can regrow, then the soil will be left very bare and very vulnerable to soil erosion. And that kind of links to the overgrazing as well. Um, Another reason is because the animals actually trample the soil. So they trample it, they break it up, and they disrupt any plants from trying to regrow again, and that just adds on to the problem. Okay, so let's take a look at each of these problems in a little bit more detail. So I like this picture. I like how it shows I think this was supposed to be by a road? No, but two different plots. And you can see how these two different plots are managed very differently. How this is looking very green and lush on the right-hand side, and the left-hand side is looking very sad and almost like dry. But that's probably just because the vegetation hasn't had a chance to grow normally, and I would assume it was because of overgrazing. So overgrazing, you have too many animals in one place. They're trying to survive and consume all of the vegetation in that area, and the vegetation doesn't get a chance to grow back again. Okay, and I like to use this little figure to show how grazing is such a big part of soil erosion. So much of our land use goes towards agriculture, and so, I don't even know how to put into any other words other than so much. But the vast majority of the land that we use is going towards grazing. So it makes sense that a lot of soil erosion is because of this, because of overgrazing or poor management of livestock. Okay, so why it's a problem. The plants don't get a chance to regrow. Patches are left bare. Maybe you get other types of plants like weeds or whatever else that you don't want growing there. The soil will erode. that soil ends up in places where you don't want it, like maybe in your water systems, in the rivers, in the dams. The animals don't get enough nutrition, the animals can get sick, they might not be as productive anymore, and eventually the animals, the land, the whole farm, okay, well, eventually the farm becomes so unproductive that they end up needing to leave it. We will look a bit at desertification, but I don't think we're going to have time to do that today. Effects and management of soil erosion. So this is some things that we can do. Okay, so I mentioned the idea of crop rotation. Crop rotation is using different crops different years. So there's a farm not far from where I am. Every year they have, so it's mainly a wine farm, but they have quite a few fields where they grow other things. And one year they might grow canola, the next year they grow wheat, and every other year they're growing something else. And that is an example of crop rotation. And the idea is basically just to keep the soil balanced with a constant change of demand and use of the soil. It's also a good way to control pests as well. Okay, sorry, this was just more of the same topic. So, crop rotation can reduce the use of pesticides because a change in crop interrupts the reproductive cycle of different pests. So, that just sounds like a win-win in every situation. If you have less pests, you'd need to use less pesticides, and that just sounds like money being saved. Delightful. And another nice thing about crop rotation is you can use the crop that is maybe in the off season at different times of the year. So instead of saying you're farming for one half of the year, I think this is one of the reasons why I see a lot of canola growth around here. They might harvest the vineyards at one time of the year and then the canola at the other time of the year. So it's opposite growing seasons. And what that means is that the soil is basically never left bare. So there's always something growing at that time, and the soil is never left vulnerable or empty for erosion. Something we can do to manage grazing is rotational strip grazing or providing fodder. So rotational grazing is basically you have your patch of land and you just move the livestock from patch to patch throughout a period of time, and that gives that patch time to regrow. So here we have our cattle chowing over here. They will move along to the next paddock, and as they are moved up, the previous space of land gets a chance to regrow. And it's a similar idea with strip grazing, but I believe in this case it's the actual fence that gets moved up with the cattle rather than being moved into an entirely new paddock. So whilst they are busy eating over here, the next place gets a chance to regrow. And then providing fodder is basically the idea of providing another type of food rather than the vegetation on the ground, whilst that vegetation needs a chance to regrow. So if you have a dry season or just a time of the year where things stop growing, so for us it might be more summer, that's when things go dormant and dry. In other places, maybe the soil freezes over, so there's nothing to eat. Then you need to provide the animals with a different form of food. It just gives the soil and the vegetation a chance to recover again. Okay, so these are just some things that we can take a look at. So this is where I was talking about contour plowing. So this is farming along a slope. So if the water comes and it will try to erode the soil, it will be caught in these little trenches as they go down, and then it won't run all the way. Okay, strip cropping is basically we've got different rows of different types of crop. Sometimes they get harvested at different times of the year, so the field is never completely bare. Other times they change what is being grown on which strip, and it just gives a chance for crop rotation. Afforestation, obviously just replanting. So deforestation is a big cause of soil erosion, and A very simple remedy, just plant something back again. The roots help hold the soil in place. It reduces soil erosion by in two different ways. One, the plant actually absorbs the water. It takes up the water, so it can't wash down the hill. And the other one, the roots are physically holding the soil in place. So when the water tries to wash it away, the plants just go, no, and keeps it there. Like I say, if any of you guys are into gardening in any way, you might have pot plants that need to be repotted, you would be familiar with a plant that is maybe pot bound. So it's got so many roots inside of that pot that if you try to take it out, it comes out in one solid piece. And it's got all of that soil clung into it. And it's kind of a similar concept. It's a more extreme example, but a similar one. So the roots just hold that soil in place. Okay, we learned earlier on that the steep parts of the mountain, you don't have very rich soil or you don't have very deep soil. So preferably don't farm on those areas. If that type of soil isn't ideal for farming, it will be very easily exploited if you do farm on it. But it doesn't mean that that area can't still make money in some way. So the nice thing about this picture, you can see over here, this is the hill. They're not farming on there. Here's your farmlands, your tracks, quite clear. Right. But they've used this hill. This looks like a mountain biking trail, kind of, I think. So they use the hill for mountain biking. They can still make money from that. There's a lot of money in biking. Um, so that's an entire sport that they're busy supporting over there. That doesn't mean that the area is completely useless. You've just repurposed it for something else. Okay, I think I've mentioned crop rotation a few times. Different years, you plant different types of crop, and it just keeps the soil balanced. Wind breaks, especially if you have a lot of wind erosion. Windbreaks, you basically have a barrier of trees that you can plant and it will block the dominant wind from blowing in. I think this is a type of conservation method that we don't realize we see a lot. So if you're driving through a nice farmy landscape, you'll often see these rows and rows of trees, maybe like next to the road or along a border somewhere, along a fence line. It's such a simple idea. And that is just wind breaks. So it's literally just slowing down the wind so that it doesn't damage the crop. I mean, a lot strong wind can break the crop, so it doesn't damage the crop and it keeps the soil in place. Doesn't sound like too difficult of an idea. Okay, fallowing is basically the idea of not really plowing soil before it's or leaving it unplowed. It just helps hold the moisture in place and it kind of holds its structure in place. It's not as loose or easy to erode. Um, Filling up the areas that have already been eroded. So this will just erode so much faster if it's left like that because it's going to funnel and channel all of that water to wash down here and it will keep just deteriorating this part of the landscape. Using non-chemical or more natural fertilizers like manure, um, avoiding overgrazing, avoiding trying not to have too much crop or too much livestock, all trying to support themselves from the same patch of land. And oh, I like this one because I've actually seen this quite often since I've covered it in the class. I'm seeing it more on the farms. Basically, the idea is that once the crop has been harvested, if you have something like wheat, once it's been harvested, they leave the stalks and the roots behind until they're ready to plant something else. And the idea is that those roots and those stalks, even though the plant is dead, the roots still hold the soil in place. So they're not leaving the soil exposed, even if they're done with the crop. So the crop, what's left behind is just acting like a ground cover until they're ready to plant something else. And now that I'm aware of it, I see it so much more. And I wonder, why does that massive field look dead? And now I see that it's actually just serving the purpose of protecting the soil until they're ready to plant something else. Okay, leaving some indigenous plants. Oh, I'm so sorry. Don't worry, all of these videos will still be available afterwards. That's that's why they're there for re-watching on YouTube. All right, so the idea of leaving behind the indigenous plants is just to encourage the balance of the ecosystem that's already there. So these are like your natural, obviously natural, but the insects and the critters and the living organisms that actually help the farms. So there's a lot of like birds, and I think ladybugs is also an example. All of these types of animals and creatures, they act as a pesticide in a way because they eat the pests that the farmers are struggling with. So leaving these patches just to grow in its natural ecosystem can help manage the crop and help keep the crop healthy. And again, I've seen a lot of farms that will have rows between, let's say, the vines or the orchards, where they have a strip of just wildflowers or grass or whatever else to encourage the insects to live their normal little ecosystem lives because it reduces the chance of pests or any harmful insects. Okay, and then we finally get to the so what factor. How does soil erosion actually impact us? What does it really mean to us? So, if we can't farm, or if we lose soil, valuable soil, we can't farm on it anymore. We can't farm on it, we can't make food. If we have a limit in food, well, I'm glad that I make it interesting. If we have a limit of food, then food prices will increase. If farms need to shut down, jobs are going to be lost. So we're going to have food getting more expensive. We're going to have people losing their jobs, going into poverty. We're going to have a balance that's not going to be reached. People don't get money and food is too expensive. We can see that this math doesn't add up. We have people maybe moving to urban areas because there's no jobs available for them in the rural areas. And if we take South Africa as an example, our cities are doing a lousy job at supporting all the people that are living in those cities. And that is why so many people in South African cities live in informal settlements. They are not able to provide the basic services for the entire population that's living there. And it's just a snowball effect of problems. And all of this just comes from soil erosion. So a very, very small little factor leading to high food prices, unemployment, poverty, and informal settlements. Oh, I'm from South Africa. I'm a South African teacher. So all of this is following the South African curriculum. So that's why I like to try and bring it back to South Africa quite a bit. Hey, you were from South Africa. That's awesome. Oh, nice. Okay, so let's just go through the environmental impacts, loss of vegetation. If you don't have the soil, you can't grow the vegetation. We've got a lot of ecosystems that get lost in that sense. Greater runoff. So if your soil isn't strong, if you don't have the vegetation, you're going to have more erosion, more surface runoff. A bad idea if you're in an area that has a lot of floods. Dams fill up with soil. If your dams are filling up with something other than water, it sounds like a problem. One, it means that your dams are going to have a lower capacity, so they can't hold as much water anymore. And two, it's a lot more work to filter out those dams or to filter that water if it has a lot of silt and sediment and all of that stuff building up in it. Which then takes you to the next point, less water available. buildup of chemicals in dams from fertilizer. So one of the things that we see when the soil starts to be degraded, when it loses its positive properties, farmers might try to replace that with fertilizers. And even if it's not chemical fertilizers, even if it's natural or organic fertilizers, those fertilizers can run off into the water sources, into the dams and the rivers, and it leads to a plethora of other problems. So I've highlighted desertification and eutrophication as one of the two big consequences that we learn about in soil erosion, but we're not going to have time to really go into that one today. I'll probably make that a topic for one of our future videos. But just in a nutshell, desertification is basically when soil loses any of its arable properties. So you can't farm on it anymore. It's been so depleted and so exploited that it can't support any more vegetation growth. And then eutrophication is basically where you have so much let's call it minerals, although that sounds like a good thing, so much nutrients in the water that you get an algae bloom. And that algae bloom can block out sunlight and can deplete oxygen and all of these things and basically disrupt and destroy the ecosystem inside that body of water. And like I say, this is a topic for another day. We can unpack, sorry, this was an example of what eutrophication can look like. So you've got this layer of algae that's kind of built up on the top. Okay, so we can come back to these two topics at a different time, maybe a different video. We can do a whole thing on desertification and why that's a problem. That's kind of all that I have planned on my side. Oh, you're gonna have to come around again then. Well, it was nice to have another guest from South Africa. You speak to people on all sides of the world. It's finally nice to chat with someone. Yay! Thank you for joining. It's nice to chat to someone who is familiar with what you're saying. Okay, well, have a lovely day, and I hope to see you guys again soon. At the very least, I hope to see you next week. Okay, be good. Cheers.